Good morning everyone. I am YANRIEL LOCAYLOCAY from BSED English 1-E.
Hello, good morning. My name is RENNIEL Santiago from BSED English 1C.
I am JHEN MAHUSAY from BSED English 1-C.
And we are the Group 9. So now, let's tackle about the global economy.
So what is global economy? The global economy or world economy is the economy of all humans of the world, referring to the global economic system, which includes all economic activities which are conducted both within and between nations, including production, consumption, economic management, work in general, exchange of financial values, and trade of goods and services.
The global economy is how all the economic activities of countries around the world come together. This includes everything people buy and sell, the jobs they do, the money they save or spend, and even the value of currencies. It shows how interconnected our world is, since countries rely on each other for resources, products, and services.
The UN tried to address the different problems in the world. Their efforts were guided by 8 Millennium Development Goals, which they created in the 1990s. These are the 8 Millennium Development Goals. First, the eradication of extreme poverty and hunger. Second, achieving universal primary education. Third, promoting gender equality and women empowerment. Fourth, reducing child mortality. Fifth, improving maternal health. Sixth, combating diseases like HIV and AIDS and malaria. Seventh, ensuring environmental sustainability. And lastly, having a global partnership for development.
The United Nations created 8 Millennium Development Goals in the 1990s to help tackle global issues like poverty and hunger around the world. These goals aim to improve the quality of life by providing education, promoting gender equality, improving health, and encouraging sustainable environmental practices. In the Philippines, anyone making less than 275 pesos a day is considered poor. The UN defines extreme poverty as living on less than $1.25 a day. Extreme poverty goes beyond money. It's about the lack of basic needs like food, water, shelter, and education. The UN has set a goal to end extreme poverty by 2030.
The UN reported that 836 million people still live extreme poverty, but that is down from 19 billion. The World Bank predicted that by 2030, the number of people living in extreme poverty could drop to less than 400 million. However, climate change had to be considered since it is a threat to these improvements in global poverty. So why is extreme poverty falling?
The UN reported that extreme poverty has dropped significantly, but climate change poses a risk to further improvements. By 2030, the World Bank hopes that fewer than 400 million people will live in extreme poverty. But climate change such as natural disasters and droughts could undo this progress.
Next is the economic globalization. So what is economic globalization? Economic globalization refers to the increasing interdependence of world economies. This result of the growing scale of cross-border trade of commodities and services, the flow of international capital and widespread of technologies, continuing expansion and mutual integration of market frontiers, and is an irreversible trend for the economic development. So for example, Philippines trading partnership with China, the United States, and Australia.
Economic globalization means that countries are more connected than ever, trading goods and services across borders. For instance, the Philippines partners with countries like China and the US. This interdependence boosts economies worldwide, but also makes them vulnerable to each other's problems like economic downturns.
Next is the forms of economy. There are two types of forms of economy, and these are protectionism and trade liberalization. So for protectionism, it refers to protecting one's economy from foreign competition by creating trade barriers. Domestic products are greater than imported goods. While trade liberalization, it is also called as free trade. It refers to the act of reducing trade barriers to make international trade easier between countries. Next is the quota. It refers to a limit of quantity coming into a country. Next is a tariff. It refers to the required fees on imports or exports of goods.
Protectionism and trade liberalization are two different approaches to international trade. Protectionism uses barriers to protect local businesses from foreign competition, while trade liberalization or free trade removes these barriers, making it easier to trade globally. These approaches affect local businesses and economies in different ways.
Fair trade. Defined by the International Fair Trade Association as the concern for the social, economic, and environmental well-being of marginalized small producers. It aims for more and equitable global economic system. So these are the aims of fair trade. First is protection of workers and producers. Next is establishment of more just prices. Next is environmentally sound practices and sustainable production. Next is promoting safe working environment. Next is sustainable development is the overarching paradigm of the United Nations. It is an organizing principle of meeting human development goals while also sustaining the ability of natural systems to provide the natural resources and ecosystem services. And lastly, were adopted by the United Nations in 2015 as a universal call to action to end poverty, protection from the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy peace and prosperity.
Fair trade is a way to support small producers by ensuring fair wages, safe work environments, and environmentally friendly practices. It helps balance the scale so smaller producers aren't left behind and can compete fairly in the global economy. The UN promotes sustainable development, which is about meeting today's needs without harming future generations' ability to meet theirs. The Philippines has strategies for sustainable growth, including protecting natural resources, promoting rural development, and involving citizens in the environmental decisions.
So for example, the 10 strategies of the Philippines. First is the integration of environmental consideration of decision making. Next is the proper pricing of natural resources. Next is the property right reforms. Next is the establishment of an integrated protected area system. Next is the strengthening of residuals management and industry. Next is the rehabilitation of degraded ecosystem. Next is the integration of population concerns in social welfare and development planning. Next is the inducing growth in rural areas. Next is the promotion of environmental education. And lastly, strengthening of citizens' participation and constituency building. Now let's proceed to the advantages and disadvantages of sustainable development. So for the advantages, lower climate impact. Next is the ocean development. Next is sustainable infrastructure. Next is nuclear technology. And lastly, social well-being. While for the disadvantages, first is the lower environmental impact. Next is the employment in some areas. Next is more equipments. Next is fragile commitment. And lastly, lack of understanding.
So sustainable development has many benefits like lowering climate impact and building sustainable infrastructure. However, it can lead to challenges such as unemployment in certain sectors and requires more equipment and a solid commitment, which can be hard to achieve.
Environmental degradation. Environmental degradation is the disintegration of the earth or deterioration of the environment through the consumption of assets, for example, air, water, and soil. The destruction of environments and the eradication of wildlife, it is characterized as any change or aggravation to nature's turf seen to be pernicious or undesirable. Ecological effect or degradation is created by the consolidation of an effectively substantial and expanding human populace, constantly expanding monetary development or per capita fortune in the application of asset, exhausting and polluting technology. Environmental degradation is one of the largest threats that are being looked at in the world today. The United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction characterizes environmental degradation as the lessening of the limit of the earth to meet social and environmental destinations and needs.
Environmental degradation refers to the harm humans cause to the earth, like polluting air and water or destroying habitats. This harm can lead to fewer resources for people in the future and threatens the health and stability of our planet.
Now let's move on to the types of environmental degradation. So first is land and soil degradation. Degradation of soil quality from poor farming practices, excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides, leakage from landfills, and etc. Next is water degradation. Pollution of water from trash dump in oceans, illegal dumping, disposal of large amounts of industrial waste into nearby rivers or lakes, and etc. Next is atmospheric degradation. This includes air degradation, particle pollution, and the depletion of the ozone layer. And last is the several other kinds of pollution. Apart from land, water, and atmospheric degradation, many other kinds of pollution such as noise pollution, light pollution that are part of the environmental degradation.
There are different types of environmental degradation. So for the first one, land degradation, harm to soil quality. Next is the water degradation, pollution of water bodies. Next is the atmospheric degradation, harm to the air quality and ozone layer. And lastly, other forms include noise and light pollution, which also affect natural environments.
Next is the cause and effects of environmental degradation. So for the causes, land disturbance, pollution, overpopulation, landfills, deforestation, and natural causes. And for the effects, impact on human health, loss of biodiversity, ozone layer depletion, loss for the tourism industry, and the economic impact.
So, environmental degradation is caused by factors like pollution, deforestation, and overpopulation. Its effects include harming human health, reducing biodiversity and economic loss, as well as affecting industries like tourism.
Now let's proceed to the food security. The demand for food will be 60% greater than it is today, and the challenge of food security requires the world to feed 9 billion people by 2050. Global food security. So global food security means delivering sufficient food to the entire world population. It also means the sustainability of society such as population growth, climate change, water scarcity, and agriculture. Next is the environmental challenges. So these are the environmental challenges. Destruction of natural habitats, particularly through deforestation. Next is destruction of marine life and ecosystem. Next is decline of biodiversity in farmland of a rapid pace. Next is decline the availability of fresh water. And lastly is the pollution through toxic chemicals.
With the world's population growing, feeding everyone has become a major challenge. Global food security means ensuring there's enough food for everyone. However, environmental issues like habitat destruction, pollution, and climate change make it difficult to keep up with this growing demand.
Next is the different models and agenda. The United Nations. The UN has set ending hunger, achieving food security and improved nutrition, and promoting agriculture as the second of its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The World Economic Forum. New Vision for Agriculture. Forums initiatives were launched to establish cooperation and encourage exchange of knowledge among farmers, government, civil society, and the private sector in both regional and national levels.
Organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum have set goals and initiatives to address hunger and improve global food security. For instance, the UN Sustainable Development Goals aim to end hunger by 2030. The World Economic Forum's new vision for agriculture also encourages cooperation to make agriculture more sustainable.
Good morning, everyone. My name is RENNIEL Santiago from BSED English 1-C. And today, we will be discussing about the economic globalization, poverty, and inequality. The Swedish statistician Hans Rosling once said that the 1 to 2 billion poorest in the world who don't have food for the day suffer from the worst disease and globalization deficiency. The way globalization is occurring could be much better, but the worst thing is not being part of it. These highlights that poorest people suffer not just because of the poverty, but also because they are excluded from the benefits of the globalization. Those who are not part of the globalized economy miss out on economic opportunities that could improve their lives. Economic and trade globalization. It is the result of companies trying to outmaneuver their competitors. As consumers search for the cheaper places to buy products, they search for the cheapest way to make the products like machinery, raw materials, and labor. The result is that labor-intensive products are often produced in countries with the lowest wages and the weakest regulations. This process creates winners and losers. Clothing brands often move manufacturing to countries where wages are low, which can reduce cost but sometimes lead to job losses and weaker worker protection in their areas. Multiplier effect. It means an increase in one economic activity can lead to an increase in other economic activities. For instance, investing in local businesses will lead to more jobs and more incomes. Investing in local businesses can create more jobs and lead to higher incomes, which allows people to spend more. This increased spending supports other local businesses, further boosting the economy. On protecting workers. Not everyone supports economic globalization because companies often face fewer regulations in developing countries. This situation can lead to workers' exploitation. How workers might be protected. Worker will still avoid extreme mistreatment due to, number 1, public awareness and international pressure. Media and global organizations can expose poor working conditions, promoting companies to improve. Number 2 is increase job and competition. As global markets expand, companies need to compete for labor, which can sometimes result in better treatment and wages. Now let's proceed to the global income inequality. Nobel Peace Prize recipient Bangladeshi Professor Mohammad Vanes once said that, in my experience, poor people are the world's greatest entrepreneurs. Every day, they must innovate in order to survive. They remain poor because they do not have the opportunities to turn their creative into a sustainable income. UNA solution called microcredit offered small loans for low-income individuals to help them start business, lifting themselves out of poverty. Now let's talk about the global income inequality. Global wealth Wealth Report 2016 by the Credit Suisse Research Institute once said, while at the bottom half collectively own less than 1% of the total wealth, the wealthiest top 10% own 89% of all the global assets. This extreme wealth imbalance reflects how globalization and economic structures favor certain groups or countries, leaving others with minimal economic power. Now let us talk about the types of economic inequality. First is the wealth inequality. Wealth refers to the net worth of a country. It takes into account all the assets of nations less than liabilities. And the third is wealth inequality speaks about the distribution of assets. Next is the income inequality. Gross domestic products, GDP. Income is the new earnings that are constantly being added into the pile of country's wealth. Income inequalities means that new earnings are being distributed. Wealth is the net worth of the nations, including assets, minutes, liabilities. Wealth inequality reflects how assets are distributed within a country or globally. Example of this is in the US. A few families hold a vast majority of the nation's wealth, while many others have very little. Next is the income inequality. Income inequality refers to how new earnings, like salaries, are distributed among countries' population. Examples of these are countries with high GDP growth may still have many low-income citizens if the income isn't shared equally. Now let's proceed to the inequality on the global level. First is the unequal wealth distribution. In 2016, the Credit Suisse Research Institute estimated that the global wealth was around $3.5 trillion, with a vast inequality in distribution. Examples of change is the US and Japan have seen increase in wealth, and the UK has declines due to currency depreciation. This shows that economic shift in globalization can favor certain countries with disadvantaging others. Next is the economic Big Bang. Branko Milanovic refers to the Industrial Revolution as an economic Big Bang, which propelled certain nations into economic prosperity while others lagged behind. Today's economic globalization and international trade continue to drive income inequality, with developed nations benefiting more than developing ones. Now let's proceed to the skilled-based technological change. First is the technology's role in inequality. Access to technology enhances opportunities for skilled workers, but often replace unskilled jobs. Automation in manufacturing can lead to job loss for unskilled laborers, while skilled technicians and engineers are the higher demand. Now let's talk about the third world and the global south. In the Cold War hierarchy, during the Cold War, the world was divided into First World, Western capitalist countries, the Second World, which is the Soviet-aligned countries, and the Third World, everyone else. Today's economists prefer GDP and GNI to categorize countries, as the original terms don't accurately reflect each nation's economic stability. Next is the global North-South divide. The global North includes wealthy countries in Europe, North America, and part of Asia, while the global South includes much of Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia. Economic differences between these regions often overlap with historical and racial divides. Now let's talk about the global city, cities and globalization. With the rise of the global agribusiness, the North-South agricultural relation have changed. Global cities like New York, London, and Tokyo have become economic centers that influence global markets. As commercial agriculture replaces local farming, cities' economies become intertwined with global trade, impacting local livelihoods. As the commercial agriculture replaces the local farming, cities' economies become intertwined with global trade, impacting local livelihoods. Next is the effect inequalities within cities. Not only in the inequality between global cities, but also within them. Cities are seen crucial hubs in global networks, but struggle to manage global problems as a local level. This overload of issues creates unique political and economic challenges. And that concludes my discussion. I now give the floor to JHEN MAHUSAY to discuss the next slide. Casey?
Morning everyone, I am JHEN MAHUSAY from BSED-ENG 1 DAS. And now, we will talk about theories of global stratification. Theories of global stratification aim to explain why disparities exist between nations and how these inequalities are sustained. Two significant theories in this field are modernization theories and dependency theories. Modernization theory. This theory frames global stratification as a function of technological and cultural differences between nations. It is specifically pinpoints two historical events that contributed to Western Europe developing at a faster rate than much of the rest of the world. Columbian exchange. These refer to the spread of goods, technology, education, and disease between the Americans and Europe after Christopher Columbus' so-called discovery of Americas. Industrial Revolution. This is when new technologies like steam power and mechanization allowed countries to replace human labor with machine and increase productivity. So to summarize, modernization theory frames global stratification as a consequence of technology and cultural disparities among nations. According to the theory, a country's development trajectory depends on the capacity to embrace technological advancement and adapt culturally. 2K of historical events contribute to the rapid development of Western Europe as per modernization theory. One is Columbian exchange. This was the widespread transfer of goods, technology, education, and disease between the Americas and the Europe following Christopher Columbus' arrival in the Americas. Example of this are potatoes, native to the American, became a staple crop in Europe, leading to population growth and economic resilience. 2. Industrial Revolution. This period marked the emergence of new technologies such as steam power and mechanization, allowing countries to replace human labor with machines, increase productivity, enable countries to generate wealth, and increase their global influence. Example of this is the use of steam engines in factories and always lead to transfer production and transportation, boosting European economies. Walt Rostow's 4 stages of modernization. Traditional stage, take-off stage, technological maturity, high mass consumption. Traditional stage. These refer to the societies that are structured around small, local communities with production typically being done in family settings. Because these societies have limited resources and technology, most of their time is spent on laboring to produce food, which creates a strict society hierarchy. Take-off stage. This is the stage in which industrialization begins to occur. Economic growth is achieved and better living standards are achieved by the most people. An important part of this stage is that the society is able to self-sustain this growth. It is typically a relatively short period of intense growth. Technological maturity. Technological growth of the earlier period begins to bear fruit in the form of population growth, reductions of absolute poverty levels, and more diverse job opportunities. High mass consumption. It is when your country is big enough that production becomes more about wants than needs. Many of these countries put social support system in place to ensure that all of their citizens have access to basic necessities. 4 stages of modernization according to Walt Rastos. The first one is traditional stage. These are the societies that are organized around small, local communities with the production usually managed within family settings. Number 2, take-off stage. This is when industrialization starts, driving rapid economic growth and improving living standards. Number 3, technological maturity. Here, technological advances from the early stages create broader benefits, including population growth, reduction in poverty, and diverse job opportunities. And the last is high mass consumption. Where a country reaches this stage, production shifts towards fulfilling wants rather than basic needs. Social support system may be established to provide citizens with access to essential resources. Dependency theory and the Latin American experience. Dependency theory, initially developed by Hans Singer and Roel Presbich in the 1950s and has been improved since then. The two main sub-theories are the North American New-Marxist approach and the Latin American structuralist approach. Peripheral nations, countries that are less developed and receive an unequal distribution of the world's wealth. Core countries are more industrialized nations who receive the majority of the world's help. Peripheral nations, these are the less developed countries that receive an unequal share of the world's wealth. They often export raw material and labor to the wealthier nation and are economically dependent on them. Example of this is many African nations that primarily export raw materials to the wealthier countries experience economic dependence and struggle with the developed due to the limited industrial infrastructures. Core countries. These are the industrialized nations that receive the majority of the world's wealth. They typically have advanced economies, political power, and control over global production and resources. Example of this is the United States, with its industrial base, reaps significant economic benefits from the global resources and labor. Capitalist world economy. Wallerstein described high-income nation as a core of the world economy. This core is manufacturing base of the planet where resources funnel in to become the technology and wealth enjoyed by the Western world today. Low-income countries, meanwhile, are Wallerstein called the periphery, whose natural resources and labor support the wealthier countries, first as colonies and now by working for multinational corporations under neo-colonialism. Middle-income countries, such as India and Brazil, are considered the semi-periphery due to their closer ties to global economic core. Core countries. These are the industrialized nations that receive the majority of the world's wealth. They typically have advanced economies, political power, and control over global production and resources. Example of this is the United States, with its industrial base, reaps significant economic benefits from the global resources and labor.
And that concludes our discussion. I hope you learned something. Thank you for listening. God bless.